In the late 1960s, after several years of hit after hit, Marvel Comics, and maybe the industry in general, was headed for a big shakeup. The 70s would bring the end of the Silver Age of comics and the dawn of the Bronze Age. Comics would evolve from the campier stories and would occasionally attempt to tackle more mature themes. Couple this with the reformation of the Comic Code Authority in 1971, which barred specific topics from comics, and the decade would become an exciting and experimental time for the medium. With the Comics Code Authority's more stringent policies now gone, Marvel Comics decided to dive headstrong into the horror genre, which had been mostly absent from Marvel's early days. With supernatural characters back on the table, Marvel started releasing series after series of horror books, both ongoing and anthologies. It was in this burgeoning corner of the Marvel Universe that Ulysses Bloodstone was set to make his debut. According to co-creator John Warner, the original idea for the character that became Bloodstone came from Marvel Legends Len Wein and Marv Wolfman. The character was set to take up the backup slot in a series called Where Monsters Dwell. Warner's initial plan for the character was a sprawling and complex saga. Being a backup feature and only having about 9 to 10 pages to tell each story, the final story that Warner had envisioned could have gone on for years and potentially even led to a solo series. Unfortunately, while I'd love to tell that Bloodstone continued on for 60-plus issues, and the series is now collected in a giant omnibus titled Now That's What I Call Bloodstone, that's not the case. Where Monsters Dwell was cancelled before any of the characters' adventures saw print. With no other series to showcase the character, Warner was offered a spot on the new series Marvel Presents. The only catch? He had to wrap it up in 2 issues. So what was once an epic for the ages became 2 inconsequential issues of what eventually became a Guardians of the Galaxy series. The 2 originators of the idea for the character moved on to bigger things. Len Wein would be one of the leading minds behind the X-Men overhaul, and later go on to DC. Marv Wolfman, while still prolific at this time, did a few often overlooked series for Marvel, but also eventually moved to DC, where he not only did some of the most influential work of his career, but of the medium itself. Warner also moved on to other comic publishers, but seemingly never to the scale of his other 2 contemporaries. With all the contributors to his creation preoccupied, Ulysses Bloodstone made a couple of appearances here and there, and then quietly faded into obscurity. This remained largely unchanged for the next 2 decades. Then, in 2001, a 4-issue miniseries called Bloodstone was published by Marvel and sought to revitalize the character. Sorta. 2001's Bloodstone would carry on the character's legacy by introducing Ulysses' estranged daughter, Elsa. 18-year-old Elsa seemingly never knew her father and is called to his decrepit old mansion along with her mother as the only beneficiaries of Ulysses' will. Once there, Ulysses' old friends present Elsa with the titular Bloodstone and essentially start her on her way to replace her father as the world's premier monster hunter. Aside from the dark implications of sentencing an 18-year-old to a life of horror and killing, this series is actually pretty fun. It's co-written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, who are most known for their work in Marvel's Cosmic Universe, with art by Michael Lopez, who's done various work for the Big Two. The story details Elsa's first few adventures and her slow ascension to confident and competent hunter. That said, while I enjoyed it, there are some weird discrepancies in the series. I feel like there's a lot of gross over-sexualizing of the 18-year-old main character. Look, I get that the early 2000s was a different era with different standards, but it's aged like cheese in a muggy suitcase. I'd almost let it pass, but a few months back I looked at the new 52's Resurrection Man, also written by Abnett and Lanning, and it also had moments of bizarre sexualization, and that was a whole decade after this miniseries. You can only expect me to forgive so much. If someone watching this has read their Annihilation series, can you let me know in the comments if this is an issue in that series as well? I really want to read it, but I don't want that dated nonsense to mess it up for me. Beyond that, Elsa's portrayal never really feels like a teenage girl, but rather what an adult man's idea of a teen girl would act like. Her quick acceptance of everything her father was and what she's now being pushed into doesn't feel genuine, which I guess can be explained away as a family thing or the fact that she seems to be isolated and might be longing for more. Either way, it didn't work for me. Also, one last little bizarre note. Elsa said to have traveled all around Europe with her mom and is portrayed as using extensive British vernacular. This in itself is fine. The issue comes up when the comic itself decides it wants to explain itself by saying that Elsa has picked it up from living in England for a while. Like, yeah, we know. We could have pieced that together without the unnecessary dialogue. In fact, because it's brought up at all, makes it seem like she didn't actually live there for a very long time, and is just adopting the accent to seem different, like the most annoying person at a college party. It's a weird inclusion and one I think of every time she says anything British. After all that, though, I still like this series, flaws and all. Ulysses' old adventure buddies add a nice bit of campy horror fun that makes you ignore that they're mostly there for exposition. The adventures take the reader to a variety of places, so you really get the sense of a globe-trotting event, like an Indiana Jones-inspired story. This is, of course, in large part to the phenomenal art, once again by Michael Lopez. All the settings have very distinct feels and styles, so nothing ever blends together, which only seems like a small detail because it's so well done. Lopez's style is very reminiscent of Mark Bagley's almost cartoony, exaggerated characters and world. It's a style I really enjoy that I feel was prevalent in the late 90s and early 2000s that really doesn't get as much play as before. Lopez utilizes it extremely well to get across the horror Elsa faces while still maintaining a sense of fun and excitement. And the last note that I want to talk about this series, I kinda like that Ulysses is still dead at the end. I kept thinking he was going to show up to save Elsa at the last moment, and I was honestly surprised they chose not to go that way. Not every character has to come back to work with their successor, and the idea that some characters can stay dead helps to build a sense of consequence in a medium that loves to kill characters for a shock and then bring them back in a few years. Not only that, Ulysses' absence lets us know that this is Elsa's story now, and we can choose to follow along with her or not. Ulysses Bloodstone, through no fault of the character, never made it to stardom. Who knows? Maybe if John Warner had been able to pursue the story that he wanted to tell, the character would have been able to garner a following, and maybe it'd still be around, traveling the world and killing monsters. Or maybe it would have flopped, and he'd be in the same spot. Maybe Bloodstone Sr. was always going to be left behind as a relic of an experimental time, unable to gel with the rest of the Marvel Universe. Whatever may be the case, Elsa Bloodstone has grown and become significantly more popular than her father ever was, proving that any idea can work and find its audience, even if it means waiting 20 years for the audience to show up. Thanks so much for watching, I really appreciate it. While I would recommend this series, if you're looking for Elsa as a more experienced monster hunter, I would also recommend Legion of Monsters from 2011, which shows an older Elsa still cracking wise and having a great time with her monster murdering business. If you have any recommendations, drop them in the comments, I'd love to see them, and if there's any characters you'd like me to do a semi-deep dive on just like this, let me know, again, down in the comments. And if you're so inclined, I'd appreciate a subscribe. There's shorts here all the time, and I've got a couple more ideas for videos through the rest of the year, and I'd love to have you along. As always, thanks for watching, this has been Tales to Showcase, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.